All right, hi there, welcome everyone. My name's Mark and this is coming through to you from Mukunda studio. And I'm really excited that we have another Empower Hour community discussion for our 2022 year. Last month was our topic 100% mixed and it went really well. It was a really nice discussion. Anjali was a part of that. And I was excited to invite her back for this panel. And so I want to just quickly introduce you to Anjali, Vatasha, and Mercy, who you see on the spotlight there. And I'll do a little more of an intro in a moment. But first, I'd like to review some basic things about our to start today. So I'm going to switch to a share screen. Do you all see this as a, whoops, not yet as a full screen. Maybe I don't know if I can do a full screen. Hold please. At least I can do that, I guess. So this is our Empower Hour, which really it's turning into Empower Hour 0.25. It's an hour and 15 minutes. But it's our story versus history, or his story, and it's honoring Black History Month. And I wanted to just share, this isn't so much a title that means one against the other. It's more like apples versus oranges, and thinking about comparing the differences, the likes and contrasts between two things. And to recognize, especially in our American history, there is quite a difference. We haven't always felt like we've been told the complete story, or the story's even been modified to serve a certain purpose. So we want to talk about that and what we've learned through our own journey that might be a little bit different than that. We wish to invoke a space that is welcoming of your story. So all stories, all of our stories, our lives, personal experience is important. It doesn't need to match someone else's. We need to trust that each of us can be in our truth. I want to invoke a space, and we all wish to invoke a space that is courageous and kind, filled with the power of diversity, welcoming to everyone here and beyond. So I want to be mindful about, if we do speak about others who aren't here, whether it's a group of people, an individual, that we are also still recognizing the humanity of that group or person. That we're supportive to feelings and emotions. We're inspired to take action for good efforts. And that I also wish to invoke a space that is joyful and intentional. Welcoming open eyes, open hearts, open minds. These are also from our first talk. Just like to continue to inspire the way that we bring energy to this. May this gathering provide inspiration, healing, creativity, or even just a good hour and 15 minutes of our time together. If you need to leave early, it's the divine will, and we're happy you could be here for any time you have given. And let's just take a moment, look around at your fellow participants. We've got a nice intimate group here, and I want to feel the miracle of being gathered in this space together. So back to the introductions. As I mentioned, Rachel Porraspita was with us in the last community discussion. All three of these panelists were part of the BIPOC yoga teacher training. And I feel honored and inspired that I can continue to work with all three of them. Mercy Mungwadzi, who is in Zimbabwe. So this is nearing the midnight hour for her. And Vatasha Poindexter, who is in the Virginia area. So we've kind of got multiple time zones going on here. Rachel's here in California also, so we share the same time zone. And then I'm Mukunda, Marc Morozumi, your host. You can already see them, but anyway, here's here's the pictures that we were utilizing on our social media. And yeah, and I just want to remind us, this is coming from the heart. This is a whole collective experience. All of our different experiences, do make our history. And so as we honor Black History Month, of course, we're honoring, our true full history. It's just that sometimes when the history is not completely told, it feels important to take a moment and focus on a group, and in this case, our Black history. And I kind of like this image too, where it's all of this is made up of crumpled papers. And it's almost like each of these faces or heads has a story that, you know, can get shared or told. And it's been, maybe it was crumpled, but it's now uncrumpled. So that's what I hope we can do, is that what we're doing today is, you know, allowing ourselves share our truths, and just to be where we are. So very much Black History Month celebrates really a lot of the achievements and the positive things about our Black history that often aren't even told or known about. There are many that, of course, we do know. And I just realized I completely forgot to share that video as we were starting, and that would have been an ideal moment. So I'll go ahead and share that now. And this is a video that's from, or it's on the Oprah's website. And I just felt like it kind of reminded us about some of the important people that have made contributions. Some, of course, like I said, we're gonna recognize, and some of them that we maybe weren't as aware of. So I'll take a moment and open that up now. Hold on a moment. Bear with me. Okay, I'm going to open the screen and then I'll open up the video. Start this over, sorry. Can you all see it as a full screen? And you could hear the audio? Thumbs up. Okay. It's a good question. You know, where would we be without these trailblazers and without people being able to have their voices heard? And so much of our history has shown where they want to quiet some of the voices. And some of what we'll talk about today is just looking at the nature of the human experience in the conversation of all this. You know, we've had several talks, this panel here, about preparing for today. And just looking at I think it was Anjali who mentioned the word cycles, just to feel these cycles that we see, you know, we go through in our entire history, not just American history. So I just wanted to set that up a little bit and welcome you all. We will have some time to welcome questions and get into more of some discussion time together. But what I'd like to do next is to introduce each of them and to allow them some time to share some of their story. And then after that, I'll pose some questions and then we'll get some interaction time together. Feel free, if you do have something you want to put in the chat, you are certainly welcome to. That goes for the panelists. I let them know that if I forget anything to send me a chat as well. And other than that, I'd like to turn it over to Anjali Rachel Porraspita. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and start your time sharing.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be with everyone again today for our second community discussion. Thank you so much, Mukunda, for having me back. And so I'm Anjali Rachel Porraspita. Pronouns are she, they. And I currently reside in Anaheim, California, although I'm from the East Coast. So born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And definitely like an inner city girl, where we've known our culture to be very mixed. I am half Hispanic and half Black. So growing up, I've always been around mostly people that looked like me in the inner city. And I have two boys who are also mixed, very much so. And yeah, that's what I would say.
I just saw this muted there. Did you want to share now a little bit about some of what it felt like for you being exposed to Black history and what you're noticing with your own children?
Yeah, so growing up, I would say from what I can remember, we did kind of go over it in school. I don't think we spent a lot of time on it. Mostly we had to learn on our own at home with our families. So it was very much lived experience. And I remember specifically with my family, well, back in the day, it wasn't so much computers and internet, and you weren't able to have access to knowledge and information in that way. But we had a whole set of encyclopedias that we would get our knowledge from whenever we needed, for school or for anything else. But particularly, we had a set that went through mostly all the notable Black people from our history who have done things. So the set was a whole volume, and you could go in and you could choose a name. Let's just say Harriet Tubman, right? You would pull her, it would be a book just on her. So my family had this set. So anytime we wanted to learn about that, all you had to do was pull from the encyclopedia set. I mean, it wasn't the encyclopedia set, but it was the one dedicated to Black history, which was pretty awesome. And I think that my parents actually still have that to this day, because that would be something that, you keep, you pass along to your children and their children. So for instance, my kids, me trying to get them to, look through encyclopedias these days, it's like pulling teeth, but they have to learn somehow. And I think that mostly from my family and moving forward, it would be something that they learn at home. I found that in school, they're trying to pull sort of like Black history out of the schools these days. So they're not really spending much time teaching the children, about their history. My son, the eldest one, he's 14, and so he's in 8th grade, and his textbook has about a chapter or so on Black history and a couple of other notations here and there, but mostly that's it. And I'm surprised that his textbook actually has anything, because from what I've heard, they're actually trying to pull it out of textbooks, across America. So certain states, I believe, have already started. And even though his textbook does have a chapter on it, this entire month of February, Black History Month, they have not had any discussions on anything Black history related. And I don't even know if it's going to be one of the topics that's on his curriculum to be taught before the school year ends. So for me at home, it's been more of, marking his book with tabs of different areas in the textbook that I want him to go over on his own, so that he can be taught in a different way. And I think that that's where we're headed in America, unfortunately. We're going to have to be teaching our children what we want them to know from home. And I feel like, back then, if you want to talk about slavery days and everything, it was just this power that they wanted to pull from us about, taking the knowledge that people could have in order to use their power through the knowledge that they had, being able to read, being able to write. And even though that was something that happened back then, it almost feels like it's kind of reemerging, but in a different way, with them trying to take it out of the schools and not really teaching it and saying, and maybe, white America feels like it's a controversial topic, and that's why they really don't go into it, but it is our history, and it's how we're all here. So it's very important that, they do teach it and they don't take it out of the schools. So, yeah.
Thank you, Anjali. I love that your background had that's accessible to you in that stack of encyclopedias, which I feel like we hardly hear about because of the internet nowadays.
Yeah.
But the fact that there's something tangible, that you can share, and then, bringing it into your hands, keeping it interactive with your kids. I want to share that something also special about our panel is each of our panelists has children. And it's interesting to hear, what are we doing to think about passing this information? So I'd like to connect next with Vatasha Ann, who is on our panel. And this is your first time on a panel with Mukunda Studio. So thank you, Vatasha, welcome. And I'm excited to hear from you.
Hi. So I grew up in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It's a really small town. If you don't pay attention, you sneeze, you'll drive right past it. There's not much there. There never was. I didn't grow up like most people think on a farm. I don't know why. Everyone kind of correlates Kentucky with farms, but there was a lot of farmland. But I grew up in kind of like a little city kind of a thing. So we grew up on a all Black city street, but we didn't really understand that it was an all Black city, like very specifically Rose Acres. There weren't white people that lived there. Meanwhile, if you go down the road and around the block into the bigger houses, that's where you found all of the white people on the other side of the railroads. So it was kind of divided very specifically that way. So the entire time that I grew up, it was always me being a very small portion of the world that I lived in. So when I went to school, there was always like 5 of 30. I always joke that out of all of us, there was only 5 Black people. Whenever I went to elementary, middle school, high school, it really never changed. And I went to one of the better schools in the area. There was other schools on the other side of the train tracks, which were the poorer sides. There were all Black people and maybe like 1 or 2 white people. And you can tell that the relation between the two was different. And it's just kind of like, you don't see it while it's happening. But when you grow up and you notice it and you're like, why would I want to actually be around this? And why would I bring my kids into this same sort of environment? Because to this day, it really hasn't changed much. The people who own most of the businesses don't look like me. So that's always been my reality, and trying not to be racist and try to not blame anyone for any kind of circumstances. It's kind of hard to do because you're a kid and you're like, well, why is all of this happening without any explanation? But, you know, I was pretty blessed. I had my mom, I had my grandmother, and I had my dad. And they all kind of taught me, this is what you should do. This is how you should behave. This is the kind of things that you should wear. This is how you should speak. And I understand now. Are you telling a kid that? Like, they're just supposed to be a kid. They're not supposed to think that if I say something bad in public, something bad can happen to me. But when I was in high school, the KKK used to still roam in our city square. So you weren't allowed to go out certain days of the week at night. And that wasn't 30 years ago. That wasn't far away from my reality. It's the reality I lived in and every day. But again, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why. And there was no explanation brought forward. Like she was saying, like our history books, it had a little paragraph like this big. And that was it. And you got three people, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and honestly, can't even remember the third person because it didn't matter to them. So the history books weren't written by us, written by someone else. So it wasn't until I got to college and I was like, oh, there's an African American studies class? What is that? You mean we have a history besides slavery? You mean we actually did things? Like it didn't even, it brought in my mind in the craziest way that it wasn't until like the 80s that we had our first female pilot. It wasn't until like the 90s that we had the first person become an officer in the military. And then that's still happening. To have someone of a color be that high in the military is still not even a reality. And I've been through college, I've been in the military, and we are still not recognized as fully as you think that we would be at this point. I mean, it's 2022. How much more are you supposed to ask for? But it's always been a very clear racial divide for me in my life. Like I don't want to say I'm jealous of other people, but I do feel some type of way that some people have never experienced racism. Meanwhile, I have to, you know, that no one's ever looked at you that way, but you want to explain how I feel when someone has asked me to leave a store because I had my hands in my pocket. So obviously I was stealing, you know, so it's different and it's sometimes harder than I want it to be to talk about. But in Kentucky, we just don't talk about it because that's the Southern way. None of this exists, even though it's right in front of our faces.
Thank you, Vatasha. Yeah, it's interesting when we aren't even aware. It really struck me when you said, oh, there's more history than just slavery. You know, there's more to what more contributions that we've made than just being slaves. Because it's like, what happens if we don't ever hear things like we saw in that video about people that have made major contributions that have paved the way. But if that's shut down, then young people don't see that to think, oh, I could be that person. I could be an astronaut. I could be the first person to run for president. I mean, I didn't know about that woman they showed that she was had run in 1972. I only remember Obama being, of course, that was such a huge moment. And of course, in becoming president, that I really felt that it was sending a signal of like, okay, everybody, here's what's possible. And I remember hearing families say, that was the first time little kids, little Black boys and girls were like, oh, wow, I could imagine that. Whereas before, all you imagined was slavery, And where did, our history it's within this 400-year period we talk about, but I was excited to bring Mercy into the conversation, Mercy lives in Zimbabwe, and she has shared with us some about her history. So I wanted her to include some of that at some point, but also speaking personally, just your journey of, living in Zimbabwe, where you've seen it be a more cohesive country, a little more divided country, and what it was like for you. So I want to introduce Mercy Mungwadzi.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Miss Mungwadzi. I was born and raised in the Eastern Highlands of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is in Southern Africa and is a landlocked country. It's a small country with a population of about 17 million people. So I went to a Catholic boarding school, and I was born in the family of 6, 4 boys and 2 girls, and I'm the eldest girl. I'm the third born, but I'm the eldest girl. But growing up, I didn't notice the difference between a boy and a girl because the opportunity were the same, the chaos were the same, everything was the same. Then I go to a mission school. After school, at school we learned the history of our country, Zimbabwe. How did the white people come and colonize in 1888? And we also learned the history of African countries at large. So in my country, they come in 1888 from South Africa. They come to Africa those years and they want to colonize from Cape Town in South Africa to Cairo in Egypt. So it was Cape to Cairo. They wanted to colonize. So they come to Zimbabwe and they started saying we can exchange this with this because the African countries are very rich. They've got all the minerals and everything, good weather, the sunshine of Africa. We also have, in my country, we also have the 7 wonders. We have Victoria Falls. So it was a good place for them. And in some places, the weather is exactly like in the London. So when they come, they started exchanging things and they started building. When they come to Zimbabwe, they arrived in the capital of Zimbabwe. By then it was called Masvingo, and they named it Fort Vic after the Queen of Britain. So they started building and colonizing and educating people. Then after that, at school we learned all that and how they mistreated people. But I didn't have any feeling about it. We always think that it was just history. Then after independence, our president did the reconciliation and the white men said sorry to the black people and life goes on. Then in 2000, they did the land reform program. I was in my late teens by then. So the black man was taking back the land from the white people and they didn't do it nicely. They just did it exactly the same as the white people do. So it was bad and taking everything from the whites and they were harassing them. It was like a war. Then after that, the black men also say sorry to the white men. And life goes on and they try to do reconciliation again. But I think the damage was too much because Britain was against that. and they even removed us from the Commonwealth. They even give our leaders some sanctions, and things started going bad and bad. So when I meet my fellow brothers and sisters in the USA, I learned that because of what the treatment or because of the slave trade, they are still bitter because the leaders are white there. But here we have got black leaders, but people are always like that. The history is always the same. So I think it's all about to move forward. And people always do that, whether black or white. If someone goes on top, they mistreated those on the bottom line. And I also learned that from our leaders here, they are black, but people are saying maybe the white man was better. So I don't really know what's good for us.
Thank you, Mercy. Yeah, thank you for that context. You know, it's like we would want to imagine here in America that if the leadership was more diverse and more balanced, because I think, as we know, it does feel for centuries, it's primarily been in the hands of mostly white men. What would it be like if that were to shift? We've seen some women come in, and certainly other people of color, but to see something that's dramatic enough is almost like what I always feel like I'm wishing for. But what Mercy's saying is, even when that happens, which it's happened in Zimbabwe, is it actually the power and the lust for being able to be on top, as you said, does that just, you know, cause such a distortion that it doesn't matter who's in power? But is it because of where it originally started? Like what you said, it was they did the behavior that was done to them. And so that's something we talked about, like in an abusive cycle, someone gets abused, they then become an abuser until the chain breaks because somebody decides, no, I won't do that anymore. I'm going to do my healing work. And that's something, you know, my own personal journey around 12-step recovery was like being part of this cycle that I saw compulsive stuff within family line until I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's something that I'm doing because of the pain of holding that, and I can actually break it by doing something about it. But that's asking a lot from our whole country. It's asking a lot from our world to break that chain, because sometimes when we do, the one who is on top, or the one who is the abuser, or the one who has the power does not want that to happen, right? They want to keep everything in the organized way they have it. I hate even saying they, and, you know, like, again, it's not verses, but there is some amount of this that I feel like we do have to see the imbalance.
Yeah, and here being black it's just amazing. I don't regret anything about being black. I'm happy, and I don't see anything special by being white, because we all have equal opportunities, and we all live in the same communities. We go to the same schools. We have the opportunities, they were leveled. So there's no one superior or inferior, but we are just equal. And even the leadership, the black man is now leading, but the black man is now worse than the white man. Even in most African countries, the black men are the ones who are on top, but they are even worse than their colonizers.
Yeah.
And in Africa, most people wish if they are in the European or American countries. But I think also our fellow brothers and sisters, the Africans, they wish if they are home, if they are in Africa. So maybe life is always like that.
I want to welcome any comments from Anjali or Vatasha. If you have anything.
Going back to what you were saying, Mukunda, with the whole, with it's not a us versus them, but with certain, white leaders being in power all the time, and it never seems like there's any room for people that look like us or have been through what we've been through. Nowadays, I just sort of reframe it and look at it as, overall, when you look around, we've become, the majority, and really they're the minority. But I think that the reason why they hold on to the power, specifically in our country too, is because they don't want to see what would happen if we were to truly unite and take that back, especially within certain offices of the government. So, we saw a snippet of it when we had President Barack Obama. It was like a Black educated man that they just couldn't stand to have in office, but I think that it's a matter of us figuring out ways to further educate ourselves, progress, unite, ensure that, all the good information is passed along to our future generations, our children, so that we can continue to band together and make this country go in a different way. It gets sad when you think about it. When you sit around and watch too much news, because it's so hard to relate, even with the Black Lives Matter movement, it was just a movement for a little while. And obviously it's still being, there's still people that are for it and working on it, but it always seems to be any sort of an uprising amongst Black people always seems to get pushed way, way back.
It kind of always seems like the thing that you hear all the time, play the game. If you want to go somewhere in life, then you have to learn how to play the game to get there. And I think what happens is when you play by someone else's rules, then you become that person. You become less of yourself. And I think the only way that we get to the world that Rachel's talking about is if we stop playing by these same rules. If we have more of us out there to change the infrastructure of who we are.
Yeah, well said. And it's interesting to get to look at other parts of the world to see, okay, where has this been able to evolve or, run differently, like in Zimbabwe? It reminds me, this is not, not a fair comparison, but I couldn't help but coming to mind, like with COVID, we're like looking at other countries to see, okay, they had their outbreak first. How are they getting through it? Okay, then that means in a month we'll be this way. So we do tend to do that. We look around the globe to make references. And I wonder if, like you're saying, if the powers that be were to look at that, they're afraid if we give power to currently the considered minority, people of color, oh my God, they're going to be terrible to us. Look at what they're doing in Zimbabwe. So we got to do everything we can to not let that history. Yeah, Mercy, go ahead.
And here in Zimbabwe, when the Black men come to power, the Zimbabwean dollar was one on one with the British pound. But now, when the Black man was leading, we end up everyone being we end up using $1 to 1 trillion at one point. We first $1, 1 million, then $1, 1 trillion. Then everyone was a millionaire. And the money changes. In the morning, you go to the bank, you take your money. And when you go to the shop, the money will be useless. You won't buy anything. Up to the point when we start using the US dollar. So I don't think it's in the color or in, if we lead ourselves, we'll be better. I think people are people. I think we are all the same, but because some of the first people, the first white people, maybe they were selfish and they created this, but everyone is the same. Because I used to ask my father, was it better when the white man was there than this time? And he said, yes, it was better. And I asked him, so why did you go to war? And he said, we just go to war because we were thinking that when someone like us is leading, it will be much, much better. We didn't know that it will be worse. Because when these black people come into power, they've got good ideas. They wanted to bring good to the people, but when they come to power, they started being greedy. Then they take everything for themselves and the Chinese. They bring more Chinese to Africa, more Chinese, and the Chinese will do the mining and they ship even the soil to China. They don't process it here. They ship everything to China. Then these black people in power, they keep feeding their families, feeding. They drive nice cars, the most expensive cars in the world. Yeah. Because they've got the money. And here we have got like diamonds. We don't need to mine the diamond. They just pick it. The African countries are so rich, so these Chinese will come and take the riches and go. But people here suffer not because not because the countries are poor, but because the leadership wants everything for themselves. So the black men suffer all the time, maybe everywhere, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Mercy. I mean, that's why I'm so intrigued with this notion of our stories reflecting with history, because we get these reference points and each of us get to reflect on what have we seen? What do we know? In order to be able to hopefully make a difference and make a different history as, you know, we show up our best. But certainly the harms that have been done are almost like, sometimes I think about it, there's no way to make reparations for the amount of harm and, you know, the part of that dark history. But like Mercy's also saying, we need to go forward from here. You know, we don't want to just keep harboring, how am I going to get back? How can I get revenge? How am I going to, because that keeps the poison of that was initially perpetrated upon us. It sounds like that poison just keeps maybe going forward. It's sort of what I feel like I'm learning when Mercy talks with us. I want to ask another topic, but anyone have anything they wanted to share to finish some of those thoughts?
Do you feel like in many ways, the harms that are being perpetuated continue when Blacks are not allowed in certain circles, even in America now, today? And not necessarily because they're just outright saying, because it feels like things are sort of hidden away. It's like not saying you're not welcome here. Like for instance, with yoga, right? Many of the studios are not reflective of people that look like us, but the pricing or various things will be what keeps, certain groups of people out. Do you feel like that's sort of like a way that harms are continued on?
Do you bringing that to me specifically or Mercy?
Yeah, to you because of what
Okay.
you had said,
Yeah,
about.
I do. I mean, I think I'll say it's complicated. I'll say that because we have our capitalist culture that really identifies advancement, and I don't know if this is sort of the colonial ingredients that have been really blended into all of our psyches, but there's some amount of that is caused, I feel like, our priorities. I mean, I have to check myself, our priorities on what is important. What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to make achievements? What does it mean to be a good human on this planet? And I know here in the Bay Area, there's a certain title and what, how much money you have, what your home looks like. So much of that equals success and equals happiness. So that model in and of itself feels like it could use some reevaluating, but where does that come from? And why is it perpetuated? And why is like in San Francisco, our housing is so out of control with how much things cost. So therefore, we all have to figure out how do we make that kind of income. So it does perpetuate a cycle. But if we can consciously create ways that those who have money can somehow then be supporting those who don't, or those who have resources can help those who don't, that to me is one way to start to find some way to bring others into the conversation rather than excluding.
Inclusivity, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also on that, I think that as the Black, we have got more limitations than the whites. The whites are a bit open-minded than us. As we say, we always think some things are for some people.
For me-
Especially.
Go ahead, Vatasha.
For me, I think it's just having basic necessities of life, having a clean place to live, having clean water, having healthy food, meaning access to fruits and vegetables or whatever else that you eat that is now outrageously priced. It's being able to have access to education. It's all of the in drive from one place to another place. It's all the basic necessities. Our life are driven by income. So if I don't work and make $100,000 a year, then the only place I can eat in a pinch is McDonald's. Meanwhile, you can order a 4-star gourmet meal that has vegetables on the plate because you have the money to do so. And just something as simple as food should not be income driven. And it's the structure that's the problem. And the structure is not built to help us because we don't have the basic needs resources monetarily. We're not starting off on the playing field up here. We're always starting off with nothing, and then we have to grow that nothing into something. Meanwhile, people who have established wealth, they can start higher, and then that's where it always changes.
That kind of goes into a question I had, which is, do we sense that racism is ending, healing, or changing in any good or bad direction? And I want to just throw that out there for the panelists to share any thoughts. And then in just a few minutes, I want to open this up to our guests, people who are here as our guests, to say hello. So let's go through this question, which I'll repeat. And then I want to welcome anyone who has any thoughts also from our audience. So the question again was, do we sense that racism is ending, healing, or changing in any good or bad direction? Mercy, you're
Say
unmuted.
changing.
Okay, go ahead, Anjali.
Changing, but I've yet to see or feel necessarily for the better. I would say it's just different ways of perpetuating racism now versus then. That's how it feels. For sure.
Yeah, anyone else? I mean, I feel like Vatasha, you kind of shared about that in a little bit. That's what inspired me to point that question again, but any other thoughts that came up when I asked that question?
Honestly, I don't think racism can end because it built everything. So the only way to end racism is to completely annihilate all structures. And how do you build an entire world from nothing? You can't. You can only build on top of what it's already there. So we can't end racism. We just have to learn from it so that we understood how we got here. And that's through access to education. That's with things like this, where we can just sit and talk about it.
Yeah. And where we cannot take it out of our schools, right? To keep the education going. I mean, it's an effort, a collective effort that would have to be brought forth on everyone's part, but government's not going to do that for us. They want to pull it once again. So, I mean, because they know it goes back to that whole notion of the knowledge being your power. If you don't know, what are you going to do? And they're banking on the fact that they can take away more from our culture through future generations. If they pull that from them, then you know what? Their awareness level goes down and they're focused on other things and distractions, other things going on in the world, or technology or computers or whatever else.
Yeah, well, I feel like what I'm hearing is that we have to really accept and understand what is at our foundation. It's kind of Vatasha was saying, and that it's through education, truly getting to understand it, that we can experience something different and have an epiphany. And that's what I think is, what draws us together, is we know that there's something that can help shift and change the way that we understand and perceive things. But that requires some spark. And that once we have that can help us think very differently. And maybe all of us, panelists and guests included, can think about that. What is something in your life that has shifted, that one time you're looking at the world this way, and then all of a sudden you're able to look at the world this way? That's what makes us different from animals, is we can expand our consciousness in this way and envision a different way to do this. Animals, maybe cats can do that, but I'm not sure that too many other of the animals have that way of envisioning how things could, there could be a different reality. So I'm so grateful that we're all sharing and giving our story, our insights. I'd love to welcome anybody from our guests that have signed in and feel open to say hello if you're able. I know some of you are maybe traveling, so it's just great that you're listening in. But if anybody wanted to say hi or had any thoughts, you can also leave anything in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that and bring that forward as a thought or question. So I see Steve and Cleo and Coach Zoe, Amina. Yeah, anyone that felt like they wanted to share? Cleo.
Hi. Just juggling cats and beads at the same time. Great chat, great thoughts. It just keeps ringing really loud in my head that it seems to be whoever's in power, regardless, like Mercy keeps saying, whoever's on top just seems to repeat the same patterns. And it's like, but who started the pattern? And yeah, we're learning about it and we're dismantling it by bringing it to light, because the more we detangle it and expose it to light, the more it can disintegrate, and that may be, a process that takes forever. But that's the only way to do it, and it just seems to be, well, why do we have billionaires? Why do we have one person in power? Why do we have, oh well, the country wants this, but this is happening, and it seems to always be a they. Why is there always a they? That's in charge and just can be they can kind of be possessed by the dark side of the force and just feel all of that, power, and be like, you know what, maybe they started out with good intentions on their journey and had to believe so many things in order to get that far, because power is this game. And we're all like in this game, whether we want to be or not. We're kind of like bound by these rules. But what if we just continue to question them, and maybe there is a line where once you cross a certain level of I keep looking for a different word than power, because like it kind of gets overused. Like the person who signs the papers, the person who pushes the buttons. It's like when they seem to get into that title and you get a certain amount of zeros in your pocket, then reality seems to change. So how do we stop that from happening? How do we stop people from taking us into their own sick reality, basically?
Thank you, Cleo. Yeah, and I felt like I wanted to acknowledge too, is that Mercy, I'll let you come in just a moment, if I could share this, just because of our current news with what we're seeing happening with Russia and Ukraine. It's like, once again, power. Somebody who's been holding that for a long time for such a large country, and what we can see the desire for more. It's just sort of like more. I want to accumulate more. I want to get, and it's, I think that Putin is a very particular person that I'd say has, the mental health of him I'd be concerned about. But nonetheless, it's a human being who has the potential for something to create massive harm for the sake of, like, does that mean he feels good at the end of the day? When that type of, behavior of taking over and feeling more and more powerful, is that so he feels, it feeds that happiness space? It's like, ooh, that's dark. But anyway, any thoughts that you all were starting to have there? And if anyone else from our guest group wanted to jump in. Oh, go ahead, Mercy. There you go.
Wanted to say they keep doing that because when you come to power, they start using the gun. So even if people want to say no, they can't, because the leadership will be the one in control of the army. So that's the problem. When people here in Africa go to vote, the barrels still vote more than the normal vote. So the gun is in control. And there's nothing people can do.
Whoa, bringing in the gun component, which, oh my God, here in the US is out of control. but certainly that's interesting to think about that globally. Guns and military power. Yeah, it's like a game board. They're just, gathering all up their little army players. But these are human lives. And that's what always just like breaks my heart when they talk about this.
But yeah, it's very peaceful. The people in power, the ones with guns, they only use it to those who want to oppose. But if you are just living, it's very peaceful. They don't just use it to anyone, but to those who want to stop them eating the money.
You're saying it's peaceful if nobody tries to disrupt anything, but then if somebody tries to disrupt, or is that what you mean?
No robbery. No, you can walk anytime. I can even go to town like now. It's very peaceful. But if I start doing the politics game, it's not peaceful. They will attack you, the intelligence.
Well, I'll open it up for anyone else from our guests here. I'll continue to have, we've got about 10 more or less than 10 minutes just to chat, or simply we'll keep talking amongst here with our group. Again, feel free to use the chat. I feel like one of the things I've learned, and I'll just keep talking till we see anybody raise their hand or include anything, but I want to be sure in our closing that we come back to this idea that while there is the dark side of this, the painful side of this, it's also starting to see are we going to be useful if we keep turning back the harm? And I think what we've already heard is, I don't think so. Are we going to be useful if we feel heavy with all of this history, or even our own story, that we have to wear it like a heavy weight around our neck? Right. And so what can we do that helps us transform from our own insides out, knowing that that's okay, that's the foundation. As we've been talking, but just to remember, okay, what can we do that helps? And that goes with any kind of trauma, any kind of, a dark cloud that hangs over us, because that happens, we deal with this on a daily basis. Anything that can happen, that all of a sudden our happy cloud bursts, our happy bubble bursts. And that's where I think, as I know all the three of the people on the panel here that were part of the yoga teacher training, is that this is it's a predicament. The human mind there are the 5 kleshas that I'll bring in that we know that cause us to lose our peace. And those are our attachments to things. So whether it's attachment to money, power, fame, accumulation, aversion. Oh, I'm not like that. I won't do that. Even pointing the finger on the other, we have to be careful of. Aversions cause us to then start to harness a different kind of negative vibe. Our ego, if we're ruled by our ego, which is more of the knee-jerk part of ourselves, or the survival aspect of us, which is always, depending, like Vatasha said, if we're not in a space where we feel safe, or our basic rights offered to us, it's hard to not be in that survival mode. But that's what we need to look at. How can we help support ourselves and feel safe? Ignorance is another klesha. Simply accepting, we don't have all the answers. We don't know everything. So let's continue to be humble, and let's continue to seek out connection with our communities and to talk and learn. Dispelling as much ignorance as we can, while we continually accept there is stuff I don't know. So let me continue to be open. And then the 5th one is clinging to life, which is a way equates with fear of death. I don't know that we can ever get rid of that one, or get rid of any of them for that matter. The 5 kleshas aren't something we're trying to remove. We're just trying to understand this is kind of what we come into the world with. attachments, aversions, our ego, our ignorance, and our clinging to life. And it's going to cause us to act in all these different ways. But the more we have some kind of mindfulness practice, maybe there's a chance we'll be able to, see them for what they are and, try to be as mindful and loving as we can. So I'll offer anyone else to share some thoughts as we're getting into our last few minutes.
I do want to say that I've been scolded. I think that's the best word to say that you can't just keep looking at everything negatively, because if you keep doing that, you're going to live in a dark, deep hole. And if we only dwell in all of the negativity, once we bring light and we have understanding and knowledge of who we really are, once we have that understanding that we can reach back to, at that point, we're able to celebrate who we are. At that point, I can be okay with who I am. I can say, okay, I woke up today and I'm a Black woman and I love being a Black woman. I wouldn't change it for anything, no matter how good or how bad or whatever it wants to see. I enjoy living in this body and I wouldn't change it for another one. That's not to say that someone else's body is something else. That's their own prerogative. But I find joy in the people who've come before me. I find joy in the people that I don't know, but that look like me, that we connect in a level that is inexplicable. There's no reason that I should just be able to walk into a restaurant and have a shared understanding with a perfect stranger. But because of who I am, because of my culture, no matter where I go, I always have that person, always have that stranger, and I always have the kindred spirit. And I think that that is always something that I try to hold in a more positive light over all of the negativity that brought us to this moment. We are beautiful people, all shades, shapes, sizes. And through knowledge is how we find out that every bit of us is unique, wonderful, beautiful, special, all of the attributes.
Well said. Mercy or Anjali, any closing thoughts?
Just continuing to, do the work, the inner work. Each of us has to contribute in that way. It's very important, and the more you can appreciate who you are, where you've come from, it's the only way forward.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to look within, yes, and appreciate. Maybe we suffered this because it's some karma from the past life, maybe of our ancestors or what. So it's okay. We have to enjoy life because life comes once, and we have to ignore the maybe and focus on what. And I give credit to our yoga teachers, Mukunda and team, for helping us to be a little bit good human beings. And I also give credit to Swam Danand for all the teachings, of which I'm grateful. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm honored that I got to have the three of you as panelists. I think we had a really rich discussion and conversation. Thank you all for those that joined us. Let's just take a moment of silence as we close, and let your eyes close. Feel the feet connecting to the ground or your seat. Allow yourself to be in touch with your own breath. And then focus on an attribute that you wish to see more of in the world, something you wish to imagine you could expand out there from your heart center that ripples out and beyond. And take a few moments being with your breath in silence. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. And may the light of truth overcome all ignorance. Jai Shri Satguru Maharaj Ki Jai. All right,
Om
thank you all
Shanti.
so much. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I'm going to leave a few things in the chat if anybody's interested. One of them is the PBS. They offer how to stay aware and educated about Black history, not just for the month of February, but 360 days. And they have a way to continue to help us educate. I also am adding into the chat Oprah's site, Oprah Daily, where she talks about some Black history facts and where that video came from, if anyone was interested. And then just one more link also that just shares some other facts that would be helpful for some of us to learn more about if you choose. So you can go ahead and copy those in the chat. And thank you all for everyone that was here. And stay tuned for what happens for next month's discussion topic, TBD. Maybe we'll see some familiar faces again. And yeah, thanks again. Thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Mercy. Thank you, Vatasha.